You might be curious about enlisted rank in the United States Army. That's things like privates, specialists, sergeants, first sergeants. Those are enlisted ranks. And that's what I want to talk about in this video. So let's talk about how enlisted rank works for the United States Army. There's a couple of things you need to know about enlisted rank in the United States Army. Typically, you have your entry-level kind of positions, and then you have a little bit more advanced, because you have a few kind of criterias to be able to advance through the different ranks. Now, when we're talking about ranks, they also kind of correlate with something known as pay grades. Those are things like E1 through E9. Those are enlisted pay grades, and each of those pay grades are associated with a particular rank. In the Army, from the pay grades of E1 through an E4, those are automatic promotions. Basically, if you've been in the Army for X amount of time, you've been at that current rank for X amount of time, then you're eligible to automatically get promoted to the next higher rank. It's when you're trying to move past that E4 pay grade into the E5 and above pay grades, they require a little bit more work that we'll also talk about in this video. There are also different criteria that allow you to come into the Army as one of those E1 through E4 pay grades, but there isn't really much that you can do, or anything really that you can do, to come in the Army as an E5 or higher. Typically, individuals that come in as E5 or higher is because they're transferring from another branch of service, so they have prior service experience. Maybe they were already in the Army and they're coming back into the Army. But if you're bare bones, straight off the streets type of thing, never served in the military, you only have the possibility really of coming in between an E1 pay grade and an E4 pay grade. And I'll talk about some of the criteria that could possibly allow you to come into those pay grades. So if we're starting at the very bottom, you don't have any prior experience, you don't have any college, nothing, right? You're starting at the very beginning of the enlisted ranks. That's an E1, and that is known as a private. Now at this rank, there is no insignia. You don't have anything on the chest if you're in the camouflage uniform, and nothing on the sleeves when you're in the service uniform. So you're just an E1, you're a private. But typically, soldiers are not at that E1 pay grade private for very long before they're able to move up to the next rank. Because the criteria for a soldier to automatically get promoted to the next higher one, which is a E2, also known as a private, but it's abbreviated as a PV2. It's just essentially another private, but E2 private. They have to be in the Army for at least 6 months. There are ways they can get promoted earlier than that, and I'll talk about that here in a little bit, but otherwise, if they don't get promoted early, then they have to wait at least 6 months of being in the Army before they'll be eligible to automatically get promoted to an E2, a private, or PV2 private. Now, when we're talking about a soldier automatically getting promoted to that, is what typically happens if they've met that criteria. Let's say in this example, they've been in the Army for 6 months, they haven't gotten any type of trouble to prevent them from getting promoted. Maybe they're passing their fitness test, they're passing their height and weight and everything, so it allows them to get promoted. Otherwise, if they're failing height and weight, they're overweight, they're failing their fitness test, then they won't be eligible to get promoted. But if they're doing everything they're supposed to be doing, automatically after 6 months, they'll all of a sudden see on their pay stub in the Army known as the LES, or Leave Earning Statement. That's their pay stub. All of a sudden in one of the boxes, it shows their pay grade, and it'll all of a sudden show up that they're an E2. That'll typically be on the first of that particular month. The leadership should be tracking this. They should know that, hey, these soldiers are about to get promoted in the next month automatically, and they should be prepared for that. That way on the first of the month, at the beginning of that month, they can do a promotion ceremony for that soldier to officially get pinned, as it's called, their rank. All that usually is someone reading off some orders to acknowledge this individual is getting promoted, and then someone is putting that rank on their chest. Sometimes it's their leadership, sometimes it's a family member. It just kind of depends on what you want to do during your promotion ceremony. In some cases, there are times where maybe a soldier just automatically gets promoted and the leadership is not aware of that, so they're suddenly getting paid, let's say in this example, for E2, but they're not able to wear that rank yet because they're not supposed to just put that on themselves. Sometimes soldiers do that, but they're not supposed to. They're supposed to let their leadership know, hey, on my pay stub, it says I'm getting paid for E2, and somebody needs to go check into this so that they can get the official orders and do it the official way. But you're at least still getting paid for that rank if they don't officially put that rank on you. So that's at least still nice, I guess. Now, sometimes soldiers could come into the Army as an E2, as that PV2. Sometimes maybe you have a little bit of college credits, but not enough for like an associate's. Maybe you did a couple of years of the GROTC program, which is the Army program you can do in high school, but you didn't do all 4 years of it. Then maybe there's some other criteria that could possibly allow you to come into the Army as an E2, skip being an E1, start making a little bit more money initially when you first come in the Army. A lot of times you can talk to your recruiter to see if there is something you can do to maybe advance that a little bit and not have to start off as an E1. But when you're in E2 and you're looking to move up to the next rank, which is going to be E3, a private first class, that does have two requirements to be able to move up automatically at least. That requires that soldier to have already been in E2 for at least 4 months and have already been in the Army for at least 1 year. Now, I was talking about how you could possibly get promoted early. That usually comes through waivers. And typically, because there's those two criterias, you typically can only get a waiver for one of those two criterias. Not very common that you can get a waiver for both. Because let's say in this example, a soldier has been already in E2 for 4 months, but they have not yet been in the Army for 1 year. Well, then potentially they could get a waiver to waive that 1 year requirement and get promoted early. How that typically works is the unit may have X amount of waivers. Let's say, just as an example, this particular month, the unit has 4 waivers that they're able to dish out based on what they're allocated down by higher leadership and everything. So they have 4 waivers they're allowed to dish out. They're going to decide what soldiers are the most deserving of that based on how much effort they're putting into it, how well they're doing at their job, how, if they're not messing up, all sorts of things. And they'll give out those 4 waivers maybe to allow those soldiers to get promoted early. So you could have a situation where even though you're doing the right thing, there was other soldiers that were maybe doing a little bit better than you. Maybe they didn't have any waivers to give out. And you just have to wait for that automatic promotion to be available. Otherwise, if it is available, you're standing out with your leadership, right? And there was waivers available in that month to give out, then you could potentially get promoted a little bit earlier. Now, there are some individuals that could possibly come into the Army as a private first class. One of the key examples of that is probably someone with an associate's degree. You've done 2 years worth of college to get you an associate's degree. Then you make sure to show that documentation to your recruiter, and you could potentially come into the Army already as an E3, already as a private first class. Another example of that I've seen is where a soldier or an individual actually does all 4 years of JROTC, which is that school you can do possibly in high school to kind of get some military kind of knowledge and learn how to do marching and learn how to do different things about the Army and the military and stuff. If you've done all 4 years, then maybe you can come in as an E3. But regardless of if you come into the Army at that rank or you work your way up to that rank, you still have that time in service, time in the Army basically, and time in grade, time at that particular rank, to meet those requirements before you can move on to the next rank. In the case of this one, we went from an E3, now we're going to an E4, which starts off as a baseline of a specialist. But there are actually 2 ranks that are associated with an E4 that we'll talk about. The basic requirements, though, to go from an E3 to an E4, automatically at least, is going to require a soldier to at least been in a PFC, that private first class, for at least 6 months, and have already been in the Army for at least 2 years. Some individuals could join the Army as an E4 specialist. Typically, that's someone who has already had like a bachelor's degree, and they not want to go officer. They want to come in as an enlisted soldier, then they can come in as an E4 as a specialist. For some of my old school veteran viewers that maybe were in the Army prior to like the 80s, prior to the 90s kind of thing, you may remember things like Spec 4, Spec 5, all that kind of thing. In today's Army, that doesn't exist. That hasn't existed really since the 80s anyways. So there is no such thing as Spec 5 and all that stuff in today's Army anymore. So an E4 starts off as a specialist. But like I said, there is actually a second rank that is associated with the pay grade of an E4, which is known as a corporal. In today's Army, it works differently than some of the individuals that may be veterans out there watching this video and may remember a different kind of format for who becomes a corporal. In today's Army, it works a little bit differently. So as how it kind of works for when a soldier may become a corporal is usually through the criteria of when someone is trying to become that next higher rank to become a sergeant. Because after E4, it's no longer automatic. Now you have to do a little bit of work to be recommended, to be able to be eligible, to actually move through the ranks higher than an E4. Because during the process of trying to become an E5 could possibly mean if you automatically go up to an E5, or not really automatically, but advance to an E5 sergeant, or if you have to become a corporal first. So if an E4, a specialist, is trying to work their way up to become a sergeant, they have a few criteria. They actually have 3 criteria, at least on active duty, that they have to meet before they can become a sergeant. One of those is going to be going in front of a promotion board. That is typically, a couple of first sergeants with a sergeant major that is going to drill you on different Army questions to find out if you're actually knowledgeable enough to be a leader, to be a non-commissioned officer, to be a sergeant, right? And if you pass that board, then you've met one of the 3 criterias. Second criteria is there's a non-commissioned officer academy, there's a school. As of right now, that school is called the Basic Leaders Course, or BLC. It's gone through different names throughout the years, but as of right now, that's what it's called. That school isn't necessarily required to become a sergeant, but for this case, we're talking about someone that may become a corporal, then if they go through that non-commissioned officer academy school and they pass it, then that meets the second criteria. Because the third criteria to actually get promoted to sergeant is a point system. There's a lot of things that a soldier does in their Army career that's worth different promotion points. Things like their fitness tests, their weapons qualification, civilian education, military education, all sorts of things. Their awards, all of that is worth points that go towards trying to get promoted to like an E5 sergeant or an E6 staff sergeant that we're also going to talk about. So in this example, we're talking about a soldier that may become a corporal before they become a sergeant. And in that case, that would happen if that soldier passed the board, passed the non-commissioned officer academy, but did not have enough points to move to E5 and become a sergeant. In that case, they will make them a corporal to allow them to get a little bit of experience before they do qualify to become a sergeant. Now, the downside of this is that it's more responsibility with this exact same pay as a specialist. So that part's a bummer, but on the plus side, if you're trying to look at the plus side, you do get a little bit more experience of being a leader because now you're considered a junior non-commissioned officer and you get a little bit of experience before becoming a sergeant, and maybe it makes that transition a little bit easier. But if a soldier went to the promotion board and let's say maybe they didn't do the non-commissioned officer course, but they did already have enough points, they would not have to become a corporal. They could just skip corporal and go straight from specialist to a sergeant. With that point system, it fluctuates from month to month. It basically comes down to needs of the Army. If, let's say, in the case of the infantry needs more sergeants, then those points may be really low to make it easy to achieve those points and get promoted to sergeant. But if that MOS, in this case, let's say if it's infantry, does not need any sergeants right now, then for that particular month, the points may be really high to make it hard for people to achieve that and limit the amount of people that are able to actually move up to sergeant because they already have a lot of sergeants currently in that job or that MOS. So those points fluctuate. Let's say in this case, if a soldier already passed the board, already has enough points, they go to the next rank. That's an E5, that's a sergeant, that's a non-commissioned officer. Now the requirements to get to an E5 also still have the time in service and the time in grade before you're even eligible to typically go to that promotion board to try to get promoted to a sergeant. Because that requires a soldier to have been an E4 for at least 11 months and been in the Army for 47 months, which is just shy of 4 years. So that's the basic requirements to be eligible. Again, there are still waivers and primary zones and secondary zones and all sorts of other things that could allow a soldier to get promoted sooner than that, but typically, on average, you'll see a lot of soldiers where they're not able to move up to become a sergeant until they've been in the Army for at least 4 years. For some individuals, it may take a little bit longer, maybe 5 years, maybe 6 years, depending on their MOS or their job. Because like I said, those points fluctuate based on the month. There are certain jobs that always have high points because they don't have a lot of slots, so they don't need a lot of non-commissioned officers, and it makes it a lot harder to achieve. Where you have other MOSs that are always in need of sergeants because they have a lot of slots, like infantry is actually one of those, where it's usually a little easier to achieve sergeant because the points are usually a lot lower for like infantry compared to certain other MOSs that maybe have a higher points and may take a soldier a little bit longer to try to become a sergeant. So from an E5, we move to an E6, which is a staff sergeant. And this is the last time you have to worry about points and the last time you have to worry about promotion boards, because after that, you don't have the point system anymore, you don't have the promotion board. But for a staff sergeant, for an E6, you will still have to go in front of a board, maybe a little bit more of an advanced type of board to drill you on more advanced type of questions. And then you have another non-commissioned officer school that typically you need to attend. But at the current moment of the Army, if you want to move to E6, you'll have to at least do that BLC and pass it. And you may not need to do the next one, which is ALC, the Advanced Leaders Course. For some old school individuals, they may remember that as BNOC. But right now it's ALC, and you don't necessarily have to do ALC until you're trying to get to the next rank after a staff sergeant, after an E6. So now after E6, that goes to E7 and above, and those ranks do not require the board, do not require promotion points. Those ones require a little bit of a different process, which involves you submitting like a packet, somebody reviewing your information as far as what your experience is, what you've done in your Army career to decide if you are really worthy, if you are experienced enough to be able to move to the next higher rank. Once that board reviews that, they may put you on a list, and maybe you're number 40 on this list for your particular, job to move up to the next one. Let's say going from E6 to an E7, right? Which an E7 is a sergeant first class. So now you're eligible to become a sergeant first class. They put you on a list, maybe you're number 40, but this next month they're only promoting 10 individuals to Sergeant First Class. Well, then that moves you a little farther down the list, so that way hopefully the next month maybe they promote more people, maybe they don't, and then you stay on that list for a while until you finally get down to the point where they're promoting that many people and you're on that list to get promoted, and you can get promoted. So no guaranteed time frame of that. Sometimes it just comes down to, you accomplishing a lot in your Army career, you doing certain kind of milestones, and then they see that on your record and they're like, okay, this individual has enough experience that they should move on to the next rank. So with that E7, that Sergeant First Class, that's typically individuals that are like platoon sergeants and stuff. So they could potentially be an E7, and then they've gotten some platoon sergeant time, and then that may make them eligible to move up to the next pay grade, which is an E8. And that one actually has 2 ranks associated with it. The baseline rank of an E8 goes into a Master Sergeant. So an individual that goes from an E7 to an E8 will probably start off as a Master Sergeant. Now, all of these non-commissioned officer ranks typically have a non-commissioned officer school at some kind of different level to go through some different types of training before they're usually eligible for that. But an individual that goes to that second rank that's also associated with an E8, that's a First Sergeant. Typically, an individual goes through a specific course to kind of become a First Sergeant, and that usually ends up being that senior non-commissioned officer for that particular level, let's say like a company level. Depends on your type of unit that you're in. If you're in a basic unit, it may be a company level. For artillery, you have a battery. If you're in the cav, then it's a troop. So it depends on what type of unit you are. But for example, at the company level, that First Sergeant is the senior enlisted non-commissioned officer for that particular company. That First Sergeant typically works hand in hand with that company commander, typically a captain, and they're kind of like the individuals that run that company, right? Your senior enlisted individual, that First Sergeant, which is an E8, or that company commander, which is typically a captain, right? That's on the officer side, but those two work hand in hand to kind of run that company. But from the E8, you move up to an E9, which an E9 actually has 3 ranks associated with it. Your baseline rank that initially a soldier may move into when they go to E9 is a Sergeant Major. That's typically like a staff level role. There's all sorts of types of roles that a Sergeant Major could be, but if they're again going to become like the senior non-commissioned officer for like a battalion, a brigade, or a division, then they become a Command Sergeant Major. That also has a school. You may have heard of the school, the Sergeant Major's Academy, right? Typically someone goes through the Sergeant Major's Academy and then they may become in charge of that battalion, that division, whatever it is at their level, based on their experience as far as what they qualify to actually be the senior non-commissioned officer for that level. But then if someone wants to go past a Command Sergeant Major, well, that's a little bit harder because past that is still an E9, but that's the Sergeant Major of the Army, and there can only be 1 at a time. The current Sergeant Major of the Army, as of making this video, is Sergeant Major of the Army Weimer, and there was somebody before him, and there will be somebody after him as well, and that's an individual that usually gets selected to be in that position, because when the current Sergeant Major of the Army is ready to retire, then Congress, certain other individuals at high levels, I don't know if it's Congress, I don't think it's actually Congress, but certain individuals at high levels will actually have to assign who the next Sergeant Major of the Army is going to be, because that is the senior most enlisted soldier of the entire Army. My viewers out there that are currently watching this video, what's a realistic rank that you would like to achieve? Maybe you're interested in joining the Army and you're hoping to at least make it a sergeant. Maybe you're wanting to stay in for 20 plus years and become a Command Sergeant Major. Let me know down in the comment section down below. For my viewers out there that are watching this video and are veterans, maybe currently in the Army, let me know in the comment section, what is your current rank, or what was the rank that you were when you got out of the Army? For me, I got out as an E5, as a sergeant. I was technically promotable for E6, but my points were extremely high for E6, so even though I already passed the board, I already did the Non-Commissioned Officer Academy for E6, I didn't have enough points to move up to E6, so I got stuck getting out of the Army after a little over 10 years as a sergeant. Now, if you want to learn a little bit more about non-commissioned officers, I'm going to have a playlist right here that you can go check out. You can learn more about non-commissioned officer, what it takes to become a non-commissioned officer, what non-commissioned officers do. Check out this playlist right here with a series of videos. If you enjoyed this video, hit that thumbs up. If you're not subscribed, make sure to subscribe. Thank you for watching. I'm Christopher Chaos, and I'll see you next time. See ya.